to the Transformational Podcast, a conversation between brothers about practical ways faith is impacting our lives. We invite you to join us on this journey as we are learning to let faith transform the way we live. We are glad you are with us today and look forward to sharing our journey with you. Now let's jump in. It's already recording. You may play it.
Anyway, just a reminder of last week we started this conversation. So if you haven't heard it, it's fine. You can go back and get it later. It's not required for what we're going to talk about today. But I'm going to pick up kind of where we left off in this journey. Something like that.
Okay.
So just say it just like that.
Just like that. Just say it just like that.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I guess I'm going to say it just like that. I may even add that as a part of the podcast, Chris. So we that may be the way we start. And it isn't a requirement that you were with us last week, and it's we're glad you're again with us this week. We haven't gone anywhere, so if you're watching by YouTube, we look the exact same. Part of it is to try to be true to the fact that we want to keep them short enough that people can listen and digest what God's telling you. And a lot of times, we're not trying to get in the way of that. We're trying to make sure that we give an opportunity for the Lord to speak in and through us. And so we hope that you're hearing it. We hope that you're finding something that you can apply and, taking that one step of faith, that one little kind of the next thing. What's that look like? And so we've had a good time sitting here joking around, because anytime you get us around, we'll probably
we're gonna say something.
Probably gonna
something
cut up So anyway, last week we talked a little about vision, and of course it was like 30 seconds ago. I realized that, but I do want to move on though in the story, because God kind of helped you with hey, we're going to do something differently, whether it's think differently, do differently, or even align our marriage differently. And so kind of the next part of that story that you guys have, from what I recall, is, it's time to move, right? It's time to get ready to sell. And is that the next step, or am I jumping too far ahead? I realize you have stuff written down, so obviously take it where you want, but how did you see the next step in the journey?
Just our house went on the market. Well, a little before that. So in May, I was just praying and asking, I just kept asking, it was really wasn't one day. It was just probably weeks of God, what do you want us to do? And y'all kind of talked about the house that we had found. And, I was like, is this what do you want us to do? Kept asking and asking. And finally, I just felt I thought I was in my car and I went out by that house and I was praying and I was just thinking I was going to have some big revelation. The Lord was going to tell me something huge and tell me what to do and tell me how the plan was going to work, and all the things, and literally nothing. Sat there for 30 minutes. I mean, nothing. And I was like, really, God? Okay.
Yeah.
And I was driving off and I just felt so clearly. It was just list your house. Just do the one thing that I have asked you to do. And I was like, oh,
because he had already told you, right? I mean, to a certain extent,
he had already told us, it's time. Yeah.
But y'all hadn't acted on it. Mm-mm. Any reason you hadn't acted on it, or it's just events of life?
We were still just getting stuff ready. We had to fix some things. We had to, clean some things out. We were clean, and I had already started that process. I was cleaning out closets, and we were taking stuff to donate, and we were doing things. But we
were waiting on God's timing a little bit.
We were a little bit waiting, and we were like, okay, well, we know we're supposed to list it at some point, but we were just still in the get it ready phase.
I gotcha.
And I feel like that day, it was actually May 19th. And I just felt like God was like,
got it.
List your house, just do the one thing. This is just the one thing I'm asking you to do. And I don't have to tell you the rest of it. Just list your house. So I was like, okay. So then fast forward, we still took a little while, and, we got with the realtor, did all the things, and we listed our house on, July 5th. Okay. And then July 13th, we got a full cash offer, like amazing offer that we really
Yeah.
couldn't pass up.
Yeah.
And I remember like Chris called me, or maybe the realtor texted us, I can't remember, but and I remember like I was not excited. And it wasn't that I didn't feel like God was in it or anything like that, but I was just so overwhelmed and was like, how this happened so fast. We didn't expect it to happen this fast, and we don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Like,
so I'm curious. What did we hadn't actually talked about this. What did you expect to happen? You listed your house, and I know there's a lot of my friends and your friends are listening right now.
In my mind, I'm like, okay, God's telling us we're going to list our house. Right. Telling us to list our house. So we're going to list it. And then he's going to like lay out all the things that, we need to do next. And like the house that that we are supposed to be in next is going to be, be available. Like he's going to give us this other house. Don't you agree? Like we really were like praying in faith and asking and seeking, and
we thought that was the magic bullet, that we're going to list it and then bam, bam, bam.
And everything is going to fall into perfect place.
Because that's the human way of trying to, that's saying, God, if we're going to do this and this is what we need you, more or less that's what we're saying. If we're going to do this, then this is what you need to do. As soon as we list it, this is what we expect. And so I think that's part one. But part two, Rob, like, I think there's probably a part of me when we listed it that I thought we're listing it a little bit higher than we probably would. And there will probably be lots of offers, and we don't have to take the first offer. And
we're not in a hurry. I kept telling our realtor that, like, we're not in a hurry. We're just going to wait for the offer that we feel like the Lord, tells us to take. And
so really our prayer was, God, will you make it abundantly clear, incredibly obvious. And which I just laughed. I laughed out. She cried and I laughed. I laughed out loud the day we got the offer, because I was like, because we were praying, God, make it abundantly clear. When she said a full cash offer, I literally laughed out loud.
House as is.
Yeah. Like, well, that I don't think it gets any more clear than that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny,
and we were not together at this time, like in the same location. Like
we were still married.
Yes, we're still married. So. But we were not in the same location.
Thanks for that.
So it wasn't
Thanks for
like
that point of clarification.
If you're picturing like us in the kitchen and he's laughing and I'm crying, that was not how this was going. Like we were not in the same location. I'm in my car again because I spent a lot of time here, and he was probably at the church, and so like. He thought it was funny, but I didn't think it was funny. And I bet a lot of wives can relate. Like, I didn't think it was funny. I didn't have a plan. I wanted all the steps to come together. And
it's funny you should say that, because the verse that like came roaring in on my side is actually Proverbs 16:9. And I know a lot of folks are familiar with it because people, whether they even know it or not, even media quotes it, not even realizing that they're quoting the verse. But it is a very quotable verse, because it says, Proverbs 16:9 says, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And so there is a lot of times when we plan in our mind, this is what we're going to do. And remember, on our last podcast, the last week's podcast, we talked about doing it differently. And so right now you're like literally in the definition of what I would call doing it differently, right? You did what you thought you should do, which was the next step. I do want to kind of come back to that for a second in just 2 minutes. But the fact is you had in your heart, this is the way the plan is going to go. And, like Chris, you said, we're going to do this, and then that's going to happen, etc. And God was like, I'm glad you had that plan, but that wasn't right. That wasn't necessarily what I had in mind.
I'm glad you had that plan, but you're literally not smart enough for this. So it's just like, why don't you just listen to me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, and it is funny. There is a lot of verses in Proverbs 16 there that talks about man and his plans and how we commit our ways to the Lord. And that 16:3 says, commit to the Lord whatever you do and your plans will succeed. And so in some ways, you've committed what you've done to the Lord. And while we don't know what's coming, we know that it will be blessed. It will succeed, because that is a promise of God. And his, what's that great song? His promises are yes and amen. Right. And so that
Yeah.
promise is coming. We just don't know what it is right now.
Yeah.
And to what you related in last week's podcast, it, it's not just that it's for others. It's for that promise isn't just for others. That's for others and us. And that means you guys as well. And so as you're stepping through that, that was where God kind of starts to nudge you, and you weren't excited necessarily about the plan. Real quick though, you said, and Chris said this as well, and so I want to kind of go back to it. God, you felt God told you to just do the thing I told you to do. Out of curiosity, how did that come across? What was the feeling? Were you kind of like, oh yeah, that's right? Or you were like, but God, you haven't given me, I can't see, I hear you, but you haven't given me the next step, because I know you're a planner. We've talked about this in the past. You are a lot like Hillary, my wife. I'm a lot like Chris. I know that's shocking. But how did that like resonate with you? And you're sitting there like, okay. I mean, where were you at when you were thinking about just do that next step?
I mean, I think because of what he'd already been. Oh, this fell out. Sorry, hang on.
She lost her ear.
Lost my
Dropped her ear.
Sorry about that. No, I think because I had been praying and being like, God, what do you want me to do? What do you want us to do? What do you want us to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, for like
so you'd already prepared your heart.
while.
You prepared your soul. Yeah, you were ready to go.
Like, I did think he was going to give me more than that. I mean,
Okay.
I thought he was going to say like, do this and this and this. And like, this is like what the outcome's going to be. But I have to say, like, because I'd been praying about it, I wasn't surprised when he was like, just do this like one thing, just do this one thing that I've asked you to do. Because really at that point, it was like, you haven't taken a step of faith at all. Like, you haven't done anything yet. You haven't actually acted yet on what I've asked you to do. Like, you're asking me to give you this whole plan, but you haven't done anything.
Yeah, you've proposed the grand faith leap, but you have not actually done anything to actually pull that across.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Ooh. So it's kind of funny because we go, God, we want you to do some big things. And he's like, all right, I want to do these big things. All right, God, we want you to do those big things. Okay, well, you're going to have to take a step to do those big things. Well, God, I'm not sure I really want to take that step.
Yeah.
I just want you to do big things.
Yes.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I think y'all talked about this in one of the first podcasts. But this, like, at this time when all this is happening, and I'm feeling like God's like, I just want you to do what I've asked you to do, and just like take that step of faith first before I have done, have shown up big yet, Yeah. And I read this and I wrote it down in my journal, so I brought it. But I was reading The Circle Maker, and and he said, and it says in there, we want God to go first. That way we don't get our feet wet. But it's often our unwillingness to take a step of faith and get our feet wet that keeps us from experiencing a miracle. Some people spend their entire lives on the eastern shore of the Jordan waiting for God to part the river, while God waits for them to get their feet wet. And it's like, I think he was just saying at that time, like, I happened to read this, read this at that same time. And it's like, man, he's just asking us to get our feet wet, and he's just asking us to take that step, and we haven't done it yet. And so we were asking a big God. We believe in a big God, and we were asking a big God to do big things. And yet we hadn't done our part.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that
you
was
hadn't taken that big step.
Yeah.
I tell you, that's the kind of the big piece of that, right? And we did talk about the feet wet faith, the idea that sometimes you have to get your feet wet to have faith. And so that was kind of really what I wanted to hit. No, go ahead.
Can I just add something really cool about that? Is that if you remember back to when we talked about feet wet faith, about that same time I was teaching about Joshua crossing the Jordan. The same time she's reading that, and literally we're not talking about it at the time. So God's literally taking her to the same place. I'm preparing to preach on this same story. And I mean, I just think it's amazing when you begin to look at the way that God works. in that
Yeah.
unification deal. And if both people are seeking the Lord, I believe God will bring
Yeah.
both people in that marriage to the same place.
Yeah, and that is the key piece of it. Both people have to be seeking the Lord. So if you find that there's a misstep or a misalignment there, that may be something Chris and I talk about in the future. But it is important that both folks are seeking God, because that's how God aligns our visions. And
Yeah.
when we get misaligned, it a lot of times has to do with the fact that not both people are seeking the Lord. Maybe one or not the other. Hey, that's life. That's called marriage,
Yeah.
and that's, I hate to say it, but that's something to be sort of expected as we kind of walk through it, because we're just human. We're normal
Yeah.
humans. We have human kind of things. So then, real quick, to jump back into the place, you find out you get a cash offer. You're not
Yeah,
excited
and I'm
because
crying in my
there's
car.
not a plan. So yes, continue.
Yeah. So okay, like Chris said before, like he was laughing because he was just like, oh, this is like, it was like a cool thing, whatever.
Yeah.
But he's very like, yes, let's do it. Like, let's spontaneous, let's all the things. And I, like I said, am very like, accept timeout. We don't have we don't have a place we're moving yet. Like, we don't have
Yeah.
an actual plan. And so I was in my car and I was just like, okay, Lord, like, what do you want me to know? Like, and I had been learning, we had been talking at church, and we've been learning about asking God, like, instead of always asking God, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Maybe start asking him, like, what do you want me to know? Because that will
That's
affect
some
what you
good
do.
stuff. Yes, it
And so
does.
I was praying, I'm asking, like, okay, God, am I going to ask you what you want me to do? Because that really doesn't matter. If I know what you want me to know, that's all I need to know right now. And so, I was just asking him, what do you want me to know? And very, very clearly, I felt like he was just like in my spirit that I don't want you to be afraid.
Yeah.
He didn't tell me the plan. He just said, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to trust me. And just
So
throughout
curious.
all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. What were you, or what, if you can remember, and I do realize this is some time ago.
Yeah.
What was your fear? What were you afraid of?
So I feel like just the
Obviously you
fear.
have faith, you have
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit, and so you have a confidence in God. But I think it's normal, it's human, and it's real to have some fear. So what were
Yeah.
the fears that were kind of, I don't know, scratching at the door there?
I think one is just like, okay, so we sell our house and we're supposed to move, but where are we moving? Right? Like, we don't have a house yet.
Yeah.
So what's that next plan look like? So all of this was happening right in August. This was in August.
Yeah.
We got the full offer on the house in July. And we've been praying, whatever. And so when we got the full offer, we were going to close in August. Well, the kids were starting school in August, and all the things were happening in August, and we were thinking, okay, well, like, where are we going to be? And then also there's a part of you that when you pray and you're asking God to do something big and you're believing for him to do something big, and you're kind of like, well, what if he doesn't answer me like I think he's going to? And like, am I going to look dumb? Like, are we going to look like, are we going to just like look like we don't know, like, I don't know, just the fear of like looking like you're crazy.
Yeah, so
and you don't, what are you believing in? Because it's crazy that you believe
I get
that.
it. Yeah, well, I get it, because to a certain extent, the reason we did the podcast was partly because God had brought it into our kind of our conscience, back in 2022, and then he brought it again in the spring. But part of the reason why I wanted to jump in, and I was like, Chris, we got to start the podcast right now. We need to do it with this story of your house, because I want to show what it really looks like to walk the journey and have
right
those
in
real
the middle
emotions
of
right, exactly. And maybe I'm the like, maybe people will think I'm crazy and the rest of that stuff. But I think that's the faith part of it. That's the faith aspect of it. Faith isn't, if it's not, I hate to say it this way, if it's not a little crazy, it might not be faith. And I could be wrong. And so feel free to correct me when you see me. But in a lot of ways, sometimes faith is a little bit out there, because God's asked us to do something that maybe, in our our terms just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it requires him to show up.
I was going to say, like, the reason that it sometimes seems crazy is because it's something that we can't do.
Right.
So, but that's when it's so good.
So when you were worried that maybe he wouldn't, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think this is kind of the how I would sum up your fear a little bit. When you were worried that he wouldn't show up, which is kind of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
How did he show up? Because I know he did, because I can see it. I can see it in your heart, and I can see it in your eyes that, okay, so he showed up, but how did he show up when he, you said, hey, I don't want you to be afraid. Did he give you a verse? Did he give you something to anchor your life on? What was it that was really foundational thing? Was it just that word that he gave you at the time, or was there other stuff that he was pouring in on you?
Right. So throughout, like, all of it, the packing and all the things, like, when I would ask him, like, what do you want me to know? I just kept on feeling like he continued to say, do not be afraid. He didn't tell me what we were going to do. He just kept saying, do not be afraid. And that, I believe, for me, is because he knew that fear was that's what I went to. That was where the enemy would just really, like, he would just use that.
Do you think that's what kept you from doing things?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, is that what kept you from stepping out? Is that fear?
Oh yeah. And the enemy knows that. So he would use that. And, so I feel like in the middle of all that, when he would tell me, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. He gave me this verse, Psalm 34:4. And it says, I prayed to the Lord and he answered me and he freed me from all my fears. And I just, like, I've just taken hold of that. Like, I just feel like that's, like, every day I'm like, okay, he will free us from our fears. And I feel like when you said, like, did it prevent you from doing stuff? I totally feel like it did. I feel like fear, like, paralyzes our pursuit. It, like, prevents us from moving forward. And when we can't move forward, like,
fear paralyzes pursuit. I'm writing it down.
Let's go. Yes.
When it prevents us from moving forward, and so literally, like, we just don't do anything.
Yeah.
And so that is just as much, like, the enemy doesn't have to do a ton if all he's got to do is make you afraid and keep you from moving. If he just keeps you still and you're not doing anything, then, like, that's good enough, for him. And so for me, I think that that's why God continues to tell me, don't be afraid, is because he wants me to keep moving. He wants me to keep just moving forward. And I read this actually this week, so it's kind of funny that we're talking about this. But I put it in my phone.
Which is where you write everything down.
Yeah, that's where I write everything down. It's just that fear loses its power when we actively trust God more than what we fear. Man, and so I had to
whoa. Say that again.
Yeah, I know, man.
That's good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I talk fast. No, okay, so it says fear loses its power when we actively trust God more than what we fear. And I feel like the actively trust God part is just so big, because if it's active, it means that we're doing something, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to do something. You can't just sit around and be like, okay, God, I trust you, And for me, like, in right now, and what we're in right now, because we're in the middle of it still, actively trusting him may just mean that you just do the one thing, right? Like, it doesn't mean that you sell your house. That's not what God's calling everybody to do. But maybe it's just the one thing that he told you. Just, one thing, get your feet wet, And
it may be as simple as actively daily pursuing him.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing that often sometimes happens is we stop moving, and we stop moving in our personal life with God as well. It's like, well, and I think maybe it's discouragement, maybe it's, frustration. And so we don't feel like, but man, that's the active pursuit. That's part of overcoming fear, because it comes down to it. Isn't that the paralyzing piece, right? But daily pursuing him, spending time with him, reading a book, listening to a podcast called Transformational Faith. I'm just kidding. But it might be
shameless. Oh my gosh.
It may be listening to a podcast or a sermon or whatever, something that is fueling your faith
Man, I had this
not just
conversation
your fear.
I had this conversation just on Thursday at our small group. And, I told some of our friends, I said, if it doesn't fuel your faith, do something different.
Yeah.
Like if it doesn't fuel your
That's
faith,
good.
do something different. And it could be a good thing. And I say that because it could be a good thing. It could be something that would normally be seen as, an act of faith or an act of service or an act of whatever. But if that is being used in a way to distract from God and it doesn't fuel your faith, it actually pulls you further away, then maybe you need to do something different. It may mean serving him in a different way or in a different capacity or getting whatever. But if it fuels your faith, and this is the actual, I gave you the kind of the negative part of that first, but I'm going to give you like the most positive part second. And this is the most important. If it fuels your faith, then that is something that is a number one top tier priority. You got a lot of priorities in our life. And as you said, Julie, Satan would like nothing more than to keep us from participating with what God's doing around us, whether it's through the fear of failure, whether it's through the fear of embarrassment, whether it's through the fear of, and frankly, it's fear of doubt, like maybe God won't show up, I'm going to jump and there's nothing there to catch. I'll be honest, one of the big things I had to get over early in even my career, but coming out of college, was this idea that the other shoe was going to fall and everybody would figure out who I really am, and I tend to be like who I really am with everybody. So that's kind of it's an awkward and weird fear as it is, like, but that was something that Satan was using. And what I learned through that time frame is that, that God was holding the shoe. And even if he didn't, he was big enough to clean up the, whatever it was that, maybe was a result of something, of the discovery. And there was nothing to discover. It's just, it was what Satan was using to keep me in a constant state of what if God doesn't. And so the thing I would tell you is God does.
Yeah.
That's the thing I learned. God does. He's in control. And so in a lot of ways, what you guys are talking about and what we've talked about is this idea, hey, do the next thing, do the next step. That's that fear that paralyzes our pursuit. That's just something that may be the title of this one. Who knows? But I'm curious if we can kind of spend the last little bit here. And I just want to hear from kind of both of you. Maybe this is not a question y'all are expecting. So, surprise. Although we don't plan the questions anyway, let's be real. I mean, y'all have no idea what I'm writing down over here. What is the next thing? What is it that God's having y'all do right now? What is the next step? Is there a next thing? What are you actively doing? What's God telling you to do? And what's your journey look like at this kind of where you're at this moment? And Julie, you can go first because you look
because
least
you
prepared.
how much I have nothing. No. Something else I read
Yeah.
not that long ago was to stop frantically searching for God's will and to start frantically searching for him.
Yeah. There we go.
And so, like, I think for me, the process of a lot of this started with the house, right? But I think it's no longer about a house. Not for me, not for Chris. I think now it's kind of like,
maybe for your parents, that maybe about a house for your parents.
My parents. Yeah, my mom this morning, she's like, so where are we at in this house journey? I'm like, yeah, okay.
Tell her to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, but I just, in all seriousness, I think we get caught up on frantically searching for what God wants us to do and like what he's going to do next, and searching for a house or searching for what he wants. And we just kind of, sometimes we can lose our focus and we can make it be about a house instead of about God. We can make it be about a job and not about God. And like, I think right now for me, and Chris can say his part, but for me, I think it's just making sure that I'm seeking the Lord every day, and then I'm seeking him over the next thing, that I'm not seeking, the house more or his plan more, and then I just seek him. And then in
Yeah.
turn, he's going to show me, you know, as long as I am seeking him, he's going to show me what the next thing is.
100%.
I don't know.
He knows.
You have something to add?
That's good. I mean, for me, and I talked about this a little bit when we did the Lunch with God episode, is just learning, going back to listening, focusing on the vision, and trusting. Just it's a trusting deal of going. I want things to go faster than they do.
Yeah.
And that's my entire life. Okay, that's not just this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm starting to realize that our faith is built in the journey, not necessarily just the destination.
Yeah.
And I think it's having faith for the journey. That it's the perseverance that perfects our faith, right? Is what James says. It's not the product. It's not the voila, right? It's the journey to get there that often God is perfecting our faith. It's growing our endurance.
Yeah. What verse is that in James?
Yeah, I think that's in James 1. I guess I can.
I have it here. What was the
James
verse that you
1?
said?
James 1, where it talks about consider it joy, count it brothers. Verse 3, James 1, count it all joy, my brothers, when
here it is.
you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And it's just, that's part of the process, right? That's if we'd have listed our house and God had said, boom, 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 just like you wanted it, then actually I think that, yes, it was a step of faith to list our house. But at the same time, it was just a step. And I feel like he wanted us to take many more steps. And there's a journey that he's taken us on. And we just have to keep trusting.
Yeah. I want to read my version because you have steadfastness and
you know what? The version you don't even usually
I know.
read.
I flipped over a minute ago. That's my bad.
But
go ahead.
But I like my version. But don't we all, right?
Yeah. What version are you reading out of?
Right now, I'm reading out of NIV. Somebody asked me this the other day. I read out of NIV because this is what I memorize in. I read daily. Just because you asked, and I have it right next to me. I read daily out of New Living Translation, NLT, and occasionally I'll read NET on my phone because it has better notes, and I call them show notes, but better notes for like what something meant. So, just to answer the question. But anyway, NIV is where I'm at. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, what Chris called steadfastness. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And now, only because it is like a core verse for me personally is the next verse. And so I'm going to read that as well. And it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it'll be given to him. And so it's this idea, if you don't have wisdom, you should ask for it. But to Chris's point, and more importantly, it's that testing of your faith that actually that grows and develops that perseverance, and that, as his thing, steadfastness. I like both words. One in my mind is persevere, is this like active pushing through. Steadfastness is a word in my mind, at least, that is different, as in like you're just trying to hold the ground you currently have. For some people, it might be holding the ground you currently have, not falling back, because in Ephesians, it talks about that, doing everything you can do to stand firm. It says stand firm. It doesn't say move forward. And so sometimes you're just trying to hold what you have. And then in other times, you're trying to persevere, as in push through, do that next thing that God's asking you to do. And so I think this is a good place to wrap this one up. I don't know if there's anything I missed, Chris. And then Julie, maybe she gets the last word today. I don't know.
She normally does.
Oh, Julie,
y'all are doing great.
Yeah, it's been fun having you on. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for giving us the viewpoint. We look forward to what God's doing. We step into that, frankly. I was going to talk to Chris about that. Maybe it's after this is over. But we step into that, what God's telling us and telling you guys, and we look forward to seeing what it is that's going to be on the other side of this. Because I know one thing with absolute certainty: you won't be living in your in-laws, Chris, or your parents' house, Julie, because that's not what he told you. That does not fulfill the vision.
Right.
And so we do look forward to what God's doing, and sometimes we have to wait. So here we are. We're waiting.
Yep.
Here we are.